In this video, we're going to be making a stripy color block woven wall hanging. So let's get started. So for this piece, I want to make something that's sort of mid-century modern inspired. So it's going to be kind of stripes and kind of color blocked. I'm going to be doing this as I go as per usual, so I don't have a super clear picture. We're going to discover this together. And the first step is warping. To get started, I'm warping on a total of 32 warp strings with 4/8 cotton, and I'm double warping it. So that means there's 2 strings between each notch. After that, I'm weaving in a piece of cardstock that's about 2.5 inches tall, and I'm going to be weaving that in over 2 under 2. After that, I'm doing the base work for the piece using Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick, doing a over 2 under 2 plain weave, twining stitch over top of that, followed by 2 rows of plain weave. I'm gonna put a link right here for how I start every weaving. For the fringe, I'm taking a piece of 5mm recycled cotton string and 2 pieces of 2mm recycled cotton string for each grouping of the fringe. I cut them at approximately 11 inches. I purposely didn't try to make these exactly the same length because I like that more uneven look right now. So I'm wrapping each grouping of the fringe around 4 strings at a time. All right, so I'm ready to get started weaving now, and I have this really chunky dowel that I just happen to have cut perfectly to the right length. It's 1.25 inches. It's about 1.25 inches, so it's quite bulky, but I kind of thought that maybe because this piece is going to be on the flatter side, it's gonna be all plain weave, which will read a little bit more tapestry, that maybe it would be fun to kind of have a dowel that is chunkier, and then that combined with the less than perfect fringe, I'm hoping will bring some texture to this piece because the actual woven area is going to be pretty flat. So what I did to figure out where the top of my weaving can go to was I took a piece of my warp string. You don't have to cut it off or anything. I just made a big loop, and then you kind of just flip this loop over like this. Then you have 2 loops. You grab these 2 loops, which has created a lark's head knot, and then I'm going to slip that around the dowel. And then I think about how close I want the weaving. Usually I come down about 1/2 inch, not an exact measurement or anything. I'm just gonna kind of place my fingers there, slip the loop off of the dowel, and then I'll go ahead and hook it onto one of the notches. And that's where I have this piece of scrap yarn tied onto my warp so that I know that the weaving needs to be finished right here. So this right here will be my entire weaving area. Now, I decided to do a double warp because for the top of this piece, I'm gonna wanna end it off with a twining stitch, and because I'm using thinner yarn, I want to be able to weave the thinner yarn over one under one. If I did that with a single warp, the twining stitch really wouldn't serve much of a purpose. It would be very loose, and I don't want that. So that's the only reason why I'm doing the double warp in this case. If I was using something like this, so a super bulky yarn, I wouldn't have needed to do a double warp. The other side of this though too, and maybe a benefit depending on what the look you're going for is, when you have a double warp, it means there's going to be more warp string on the actual dowel. I'm gonna get a couple of examples of this. Okay, I don't have the perfect example to show you, but because I have so many woven wall hangings kicking around, I thought I would just show you an example of kind of the difference. It just won't be perfect. So this is the weaving I made in the last video, and I did a single warp with 4/8 cotton. So that's this thinner cotton warp string, and you can see that the groupings end up quite small. So in this weaving, this new one, these groupings will feel twice as thick. Now here's an example, which isn't a perfect example because this is also a thicker warp string, but here's an example of a double warp, and you can see how much more full those groupings are here compared to here. So that's another thing you can think of when you're creating a weaving is what you want the top to look like, and you could use a double warp if you like that bulkier look. So for this weaving, we're going to be using a yarn that is kind of near and dear to my heart. We're going to be using Briggs & Little Heritage yarn. And the reason it's kind of near and dear to my heart is because I went to the New Brunswick College of Craft and Design in Fredericton, New Brunswick. many years ago. And Briggs & Little happens to be a yarn mill that is not that far from Fredericton. So if you want to check out a completely Canadian made yarn, you can kind of just search Briggs & Little Heritage plus your area, and you'll probably find someone semi near you if you're in Canada or the US that probably carries this yarn. I will put a couple links in the description box below for you as well. I'm not gonna lie to you, I just literally went on Pinterest and searched mid-century modern color palette, and this is essentially what came up, and I happened to have these colors, so I was like, great, let's just go with that. What I want to achieve here is something that feels kind of striped but also kind of color blocked. So instead of doing really boxy color blocks like this, I want to do them like this. So kind of long, narrow stripes, but that don't necessarily always go completely across the warp. My instinct is to start with the navy, and this is going to be one of those things that I am doing entirely by instinct. I could have drawn a picture. Personally, my creative process isn't always very planned out. I think sometimes that kind of like makes it less fun for me. So if you're someone that really likes to plan, I feel like for this kind of piece especially, you could definitely draw this out. So if that's your preference, you can absolutely do that. But I think the thing I love about this style of weaving is that you can really do it however works for you. You can sketch something out, you can just wing it on the canvas that is a blank warp. Kind of like how some people would draw out a painting on a canvas before starting to paint, and others would just like start to paint and follow their heart. So those are kind of like a couple different ways you could do it. All right, so I'm going to just start weaving. I will be weaving the majority of this piece with over 2 under 2 plain weave, and that again is because I want this to be more of a tapestry look. And what I mean by more of a tapestry look is that it's what's called a weft faced cloth, which means we're seeing the weft yarns and we're not seeing the warp yarns. That's why I'm doing over 2 under 2, but at the very top is where I will be doing a twining stitch that goes over 1 under 1, and that is so we can have that super secure twining stitch at the top that we need to keep everything nice and stable. All right, I'm gonna go into the zone, turn on a podcast, and see what I can come up with. Okay, I have a thought already. So I don't know if you can see, this is like a nitty gritty little detail, but because I ended this row where this fringe is, it's feeling like there's sort of a natural gap here that will get closed once I'm weaving further up here. However, with these 2 shapes, I'm feeling like I should have taken this row to the center of one of these groupings of fringe because these are naturally wanting to sit closer together. This one is going into this grouping, this one's going into this grouping. So if I ended up here, I feel like that might be a better idea. So I think already I'm gonna go ahead and unweave what I've woven. As much as we all get annoyed with the unweaving process, and myself, it took years for me to accept this, but unweaving is part of weaving. It just is. Think about it like an eraser if you're drawing with pencil. Like if you mess up, are you gonna just be like, whatever, I'm just gonna keep going? Or are you just gonna like take a second to erase it? I'm gonna take a second to erase it. There's a couple different ways I could go about this. We're doing stripes, we're doing more rectangles. So this is gonna be a piece that is going to be reading a little bit more linear. So there's the strategy that I try to take into more of the organic shape pieces where everything is random but still cohesive. And I thought that what I wanted for this piece is that everywhere where the 2 colors are meeting to be placed differently on the piece. But now I'm thinking maybe there's something to them actually lining up. So I think I'm actually gonna go that route. So I counted how many strings I had here, and I had 11 groupings of 2. So I'm going to leave 11 groupings of 2 over here as well. And I'm gonna see what that looks like, because now that I think about it, that's about even. So the amount of groupings in the center is now 10. And I'm thinking that actually might be visibly pleasing. So we're gonna go for it. Okay, I actually discovered a somewhat of a mistake. So something that you have to keep in mind when you're doing a piece like this is the next row. So you can see here, I have 2 rows that are lining up. And by that I mean, when you're doing plain weave, you want one row to be the opposite of the other. So if it's over under one way, you want it under over the other. So I made a mistake here, and I'm hoping that I can fix it, because basically I'm gonna need this piece to come back around. That's going to leave me a very tiny tail, but I think that I can make it work and just tuck it in later. But that's something I kind of completely forgot about, is that, so this line needs to be continuous. So this is going over, under, over, and then we have another over. So I need to make it the opposite. Does that make sense? Clear as mud? Hopefully. All right, so I fixed that, and now I should be able to just sort of push this all back down, and now it'll line up nicely. The biggest reason for not having 2 rows is, in this case, because I'm wanting to not see the warp strings, is that when we have a row that's set on top of the other and not the reverse of the other, it shows the warp strings. So now it's fixed. I've woven a little bit more, and I have 5 different colors, so this is where the colors are going to start repeating. What I'm trying to do is create that balance and not have the same colors only on one side. So we have navy, then orange, then green, then white, then this yellow, and now I'm going back to the navy. So after this, I'm just gonna be staggering the colors. Now, am I going to do the orange next in the small spot and have 2 small orange spots? Maybe not. Maybe I'm gonna go with the white instead, so that we're creating this balance, but also still kind of random look. And that's kind of like what I'm doing here, because I'm using 5 different colors. So I'm gonna have to be kind of paying attention to what colors were used on which side and how big that section was to create that balance I'm trying to go for. I'm slightly stumped on where to go next, because I was thinking about doing a small section of white next, but if I do a small section of white, I'm gonna end up with the orange on the same side. I almost feel like, well, I do feel like it would have been easier if I had 6 colors, so then I could just start repeating the colors. Give me a moment. I might need a 6th color. I might need to replace this and do more repeating than I had planned to. All right, I've made a decision to add another color, and I'm gonna do this burgundy. I'm also trying to pay really close attention to my edges to make sure I'm not letting them draw in a whole lot. I want them to end up pretty nice and straight. And every once in a while I'm setting this back on the piece to just sort of like see how it's feeling. All right, what color? What color? Now I'm just like, do I bring in a random pop of color that's completely outside of what I've done so far? Because I mean, technically that is another option. And I feel like I'm gonna regret making it too random. All right, so let's check in again. I know what I want to do next, I think. I think I need to bring back the yellow. So I guess now it's less about being like, the yellow's on this side, then it's on this side, then it's back on this side. I'm kind of switching that up a little bit, but I guess, no, I do think I need to do the yellow next, So I'm kind of breaking my own rules, and I feel like with these types of pieces and even with the more organic ones, it just kind of happens when you start getting into it. You're like, unless I had maybe even more colors, or maybe it was like every time the navy and the orange show up, they show up together. I probably could have done it that way, but I'm really enjoying this more random look. And I think I am gonna go in with the yellow next, even though the last time I did the yellow, it was on this side. I thought there were gonna be more rhyme and reason and rules to this piece, and there just isn't. From here on out, I was really just going off of vibes. This piece is not perfectly symmetrical, but I do think it feels balanced, and I was just trying to stagger the colors from being on one side versus the next, even if that meant I had two larger yellow rectangles in a row or two smaller orange rectangles in a row. It still, I think, feels really balanced, but it was more about just making sure that the colors themselves were staggered and not worrying as much about the size of those colors. Once I finished weaving all of the rectangles, I needed to finish the top. So I went back to the white yarn since it was the same color as my warp string. I always find that that works best for the top of a piece because it kind of hides the warp strings in it. And I took that yarn and I wove 2 rows of over one, under one plain weave. So just a standard plain weave, a nice tight one. And then on that last row of plain weave, I did my twining stitch over top. Then I flipped over the piece and it was time to deal with the back. There's obviously a ton of ends to tuck in on this one since I wove so many different sections on this piece, but I just took it one at a time and it was totally fine. It took a long time, but that's how it goes. Then I started finishing the bottom. So I slipped off the warp strings from the bottom of my loom and I started tying the warp strings in groups of approximately 4 strings into overhand knots, and that's just going to make sure that those strings don't slip around. And then I almost just cut those off at the bottom, but I decided I should tuck them back into the piece. Since it was a thinner warp string, I could totally do this. Sometimes when I use an 8/8 cotton warp string, I won't do it this way. I'll just cut them off short and neat on the back because it's hard to get them fitting all back into the weaving, but in this case, it worked to do it this way. Then I started working on the top of the piece. I barely had enough room left at the top of these warp strings to fit around this extra large dowel, but it still worked, and I did them in groups of 4. So I grabbed 4 loops, opened them up, flipped them over, creating that lark's head knot, and then slipping them onto the dowel. And I did that all the way across. This is where making sure I had enough warp strings on my loom to begin with to be able to do these groups of 4 was really important. I do try to think about that when I start the piece. And then I added a hanging string. I used the same warp string to do the hanging string as well. And then I started working on the fringe. So the fringe, I did want to be uneven, but it was quite uneven. So I just kind of cut it somewhat flush on the bottom. And then I just went in on individual strings and like cut some of them a little bit shorter, making sure again that that bottom wasn't perfect because that's really what I wanted to go for. It's all done. So let's have a look at the finished piece. Okay, I think this is a really fun one and it could look so good in so many different color palettes. Let me know in the comments below if you're going to make your own color block woven wall hanging, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this one next.